Hi, I'm Cassidy Tony, and I'm going to review some information that I learned this semester about the death penalty. So, I know all of us are familiar with what the death penalty is, or at least most of us are. This is just a brief overview of the definition of the death penalty, some examples of exclusions, and the support that's demonstrated throughout the nation. So, the death penalty is used for capital offenses. So, these are crimes that involve premeditation, and there's severe damage typically included in these crimes that are committed. Some examples of these crimes include things like treason, first degree murder, and espionage. Examples of exclusions for the death penalty are things like manslaughter or people who are intellectually disabled. There are other examples of exclusions, and the main thing here is the Eighth Amendment. If it goes against the Eighth Amendment, then people are not able to receive the capital punishment. Also, polls demonstrate support from Americans in previous years. So there is a trend, I would say, about a handful of decades ago, a majority of Americans were in support of the death penalty. But now that there's more information coming out about the death penalty, which we're going to talk about here in a second, now that there's more information, less people are supportive of the penalty. So, like it says on that last bullet point, recent polls show increased dislike for the capital punishment. Just because there are a lot of things, such as the belief that the death penalty will deter crime, that it, creates closure for families, so on and so forth. But we'll talk about that in a second. So, like I was saying before, we have the closure myth. So, this is for victim and or victim families. There's this false belief that victim and victim families are going to feel lighter or more free after the perpetrator is killed through the death penalty. But there is a very low percentage rate for victim and victim families to experience a sense of closure. There's lack of impact on criminal offenses. Sorry about that. But not only does the death penalty not deter crime whatsoever, it also increases the risk of the perpetrator's family engaging in criminal acts, just because they do receive, of course, a lot of backlash, a lot of hatred from the community whenever their family member is on death row. Financial burden on taxpayers. So there was a study with, I believe it was the state of Nebraska, where individuals who were sentenced to life without parole actually were half the price for taxpayers than death penalty cases, just because of how long the death penalty case can be, how often it's challenged, just all of the pieces in the court that have to transpire that causes a lot of financial burden for taxpayers. And then there's also racism and sexism involved in the death penalty. So a lot of the time people are sentenced to the death penalty whenever their victim is white and male. And then there's racism too, because African Americans report a higher worry about being sentenced by the death penalty than people who are white. So there's racism, there's sexism, there's a lot of discrimination involved whenever it comes to the death penalty. So some requests whenever it comes to, I guess, rewriting what the capital punishment would look like would be reconsideration of which crimes permit the death penalty. Also, using life without parole as punishment in more cases than the death penalty. I feel like because of that financial burden, that would be like a very strong point whenever it comes to legislation. Raising awareness and educating the public on said concerns related to the closure myth, deterrence, financial burdens, and discrimination would be another thing that I would request. Some recommendations for implementation that I have here include social workers writing letters to legislation, Congress and other government officials, requesting to present evidence to government officials on related concerns. Barriers could include insufficient funding against powerful individuals, quick rejection from officials as there might be worries of abolishment. Another thing, ideas for overcoming barriers might involve identifying numerous sources for funding, compromising abolishment for revisions, and emphasizing the financial burden the death penalty brings to the economy, like I was saying before. Number three, reaching a point of negotiation and compromise with officials on policy changes. And then the last thing, lessening crimes eligible for the death penalty versus life without parole. And then I put that the initial source of funding would be project grants and private philanthropy. And here are all my citations. I really appreciate you listening to my presentation, and I hope that it was somewhat informative.